Welcome back to the Dynamic Sound Lab. This is where I explore the lovely world of game audio. Spells are some of my favorite things to design because they can basically just be whatever you want. So today, I'm going to design 3 different spells, each its own elemental type, and then I'm going to implement those spells into a scene that I created in Unreal Engine 5, using 3 of the main game audio implementation tools: Wwise, FMOD, and Unreal Engine's own Metasounds. Alright, this video is going to be in 3 chunks. Chunk the first, I'm going to design the sounds and show you through my whole process of designing spells. Chunk the second is I'm going to show you the scene that I created in Unreal Engine, and we're going to kind of talk about the hooks that I'm setting up for the implementation. And chunk the 3 is the implementation itself, using those 3 different middleware tools. Basically, the goal is going to be to have the spells function the exact same way in all 3 implementation styles, and the hoops that I have to jump through to get that, and have some fun along the way. Let's start with the creation of the sounds. So all 3 of the sounds are going to function the same way. They're all going to have an attack, which is going to happen when you press the button, and then they're going to have a loop that stays there for the entirety of the button being pressed. It's also going to increase in intensity and get more epic and crazy. And then when you release the button, it's going to have a big spell explosion. Let's start with fire. I'm making heavy use of layering, and I do that in sound design in general. Layering is one of the greatest techniques that we have to create these cool and unique sounds. Even if you're using sounds from a library, they'll sound cool and unique to you if you layer them in a way that no one else did. So fire is going to be the one that I'm implementing with Metasounds, and it's going to have this kind of attack that sounds like a spark igniting. Alright, so after those layers, we're going to have a looping sound, but I'm going to make it so that it can increase in intensity as time goes on. And then, when we release the button, we have this giant explosion. Alright, let's use my World of Warcraft Fire Mage J-Bones to demonstrate this spell. Alright, let's take a look at the lightning spell. So lightning is going to be the one that I'm implementing with Wwise. We're going to have this nice initial sparks sound. And then it's going to have this building loop of energy that can't be contained. And then when we release the button, whoosh, we've got our lightning strike. Let's check out the lightning spell with my Shaman Thunderman. Alright, lastly we have our ice spell, which is going to be in FMOD, and that's going to start with this building up of chilly, frosty sounds. Then we've got this looping layer, which is going to sound like it's just impossibly cold and chilly at all times. And then player releases the button, whoosh, icicles everywhere, Canadian winter, all the good stuff. Alright, let's check that out on my Frost Mage. Audio systems in the Unreal Engine has been my main focus for the last while here, but I've also tasked myself to learn as many other aspects of the engine as possible to help enrich my audio needs. So I tasked myself with creating this beautiful masterpiece of a scene. I used as many free assets from the marketplace as I could, and I worked with the landscape tool, the foliage tool, the materials tool, static meshes and animation, particle effects, lighting, dragon exploding. I created 3 variations on this scene, one for each of the elemental types, which you can see here as demonstrated by these cool magical crystals, Final Fantasy style. And now with that created, let's implement. You can see here I've got a bunch of different sections to this one meta sound. This is the entire spell. So I'm going to be taking care of starting the spell, the loop of the spell, and then the fire blast of it. It's all going into a stereo mixer, and then I have a couple of different variables for fading in and out the loops. So let's just check it out. So basically I have 2 input triggers, one for the casting of the spell, and then one for the firing of the spell. So when I press the input trigger for cast, it's going to do the whoosh spell start, and then it's going to do the loop, and then that's going to loop endlessly until I press fire. And when I press fire, the fire input is going to stop all of the loops and the start, and it's going to play the ending part, the big blast spell. And then at the end of that blast spell, it's going to trigger the output on finished here, so it's going to kill the meta sound, taking care of all that. Unreal Engine doesn't necessarily know what audio is being played from the meta sound. It just knows that we're doing something. And so we call this on finished output in a nice predictable spot here to make it so that the meta sound will stop when we want it to and not just keep going endlessly. All right, so I'm going to start with the spell cast input trigger, which is going to play this, and then on a delay, it's going to play all 3 of these, and those are the 3 loops. All right, let's see it. It's super satisfying with Metasound seeing everything go through its process. All right, let's look at the start here. So I have the spellcast input trigger, and it's just going into a wave player, and that is just playing the one wave starting of the sound. Nice and simple. All right, let's look at the loops. So this one here, the loop bass, this is the low one that sounds like this. This one gets triggered at the same time as the start of the spell, except it has a delay, which means it's going to take 1.7 seconds before actually triggering the thing here. And then when I trigger it, I'm setting a float value at 0. And then with this interp2 node, it's going to be going to the target value over the course of 4 seconds. So it's going to go from 0 to 7 in 4 seconds, which is going to be our pitch shift. And so I'm taking that loop, and I'm slowly pitching it up over the course of 4 seconds to kind of give it the sense that it's gaining in intensity. All right, then I have this intensity loop, which is doing a very similar thing, except I'm going from 0 to 16 on the pitch shift, and I'm doing it over 2 seconds, so it's going to be increasing way faster. All right, this is probably the coolest one here, and this is the gradually speeding up with these little spark sounds. So over here, I'll start at the end here and work back. So we have the wave player. Everything pretty much needs the wave player with the output going into a mixer so that we can hear it. And then I'm doing a bunch of these little spark sounds that sound like this. And I've placed those in an array, which is really easy to do. Basically, you can create a variable down here. So I'm going to create a variable. Let's call it array. Hooray. All right, and I don't want that to be float, but instead I want that to be wave assets. And then you can see there's a little button here that's being blocked. But if I press it, it says is array. And so when I click that, it has now turned that into an array. And then I can go into my content drawer. And you can see I've got all these assets here. I'm just going to move this down. All right, let's say I just want to take these 3, for example. I can highlight them all. drag them, drop them, and now I've got this beautiful array of those 3 fire sparks. All right, so basically that has an array of those sparks, and I'm randomly getting one every time it's triggered. All right, then I have a trigger repeat, which just means it's going to be repeating that trigger over and over again at a set rate. But the set rate that I have here, I've called it another variable called spark rate. I've connected that to beats per minute. So they have an awesome node here in Metasounds that's the BPM to seconds, and you can take beats per minute, convert it into a seconds variable, and use that to trigger things like repeats or delays, all that kind of fun stuff. All right, so what's happening here is I've created this float value, which I'm converting into beats per minute. So I've got float value starting at 100, going to 250. I took that variable, put it in an interp2 node. So it's going from 100 to 250 over the course of 3 seconds, and that value is into the BPM, and the BPM is going here. All right, so the beats per minute is going to be going from 100 beats to 250 beats over the course of 3 seconds. And it's going to be triggering that every beat here. All right, so then we have the fire trigger input, which when I press that, it's going to be playing the one little wave sound of the whoosh, and then at the same time, it's going to be stopping the spark repeat. It's also going to be stopping the starting part if I were to trigger it pretty instantly. But you see it's not stopping this wave player for both of these loops. And that's because I created this little thing over here, which is going to be a fade in and fade out. And so it's actually going to be triggering the fade out instead of just stopping it outright. Because at the end of it, it's going to be stopping the entire Metasound, so that'll stop it outright. But I wanted it to be nice and smooth. And so what I did was I have this float value again, just 0 to 1. And this output value is a variable for fade in and fade out. And so for fade in, I'm going from 0 to 1, and fade out, I'm going from 1 back to 0. I have it doing that when I cast the spell with the same delay that the loop had. All right, so it's creating these variables of fade in and fade out. And fade in, it has a nice interp2 node again, which just means over 1 second it's going to be doing that. And then I have the fade out doing the same thing, but over 2 seconds, so it's fading out a little slower, a little smoother. And it's switching to that fade out when I press fire. All right. You can see also I have the loop volume value that was created here. That's another variable. To create any of these variables, so say I wanted this value and I wanted to be able to use it somewhere, I just pull off and I can say promote to graph variable. And now I have that, and I can just plug that into anything. Metasounds is pretty smart with it too, so if you try to plug it into something it doesn't want you to, it'll just give you the red X, and you know that you can't do that. So a lot of times I just kind of experiment with what I can plug things into, and then test things out and find fun little happy accidents. So with all of that, now I need to connect it into the game. And so I'm going to do that in my blueprints here. I'm doing that in the level blueprint, but you can do that pretty much anywhere. All right, so you can see in blueprints here, I have this R. And so you can see I have all these different little keyboard events that you can use. You can do pretty much any little keyboard button. I chose R because that's fun. All right, and then that has a pressed and released, which is exactly what I want. So on the pressed, I added the node for spawn sound 2D. I'm not adding attenuation to this spell, just for this kind of Final Fantasy-like scene. You could spawn sound at location with mono sounds not surrounding you. Having that come from a certain direction, that's always good too. All right, then I added the meta sound for the fire spell. And then, so this audio component is where this return value comes from. But I want to be able to reference that later. So I did the same kind of thing where I drag off and then said promote to variable. And then I created that variable and named it audio component. I also like to do things like this where I put it in the category of audio. just so on the side here, now I'm in my own little audio category. That works really well if I'm working with a team, so I don't just like clog up all of the variables. All right, and then off of the audio component here, I was able to do the execute trigger parameter node, and I'm triggering the spell cast, which was this input here. All right, then off of that, I'm also driving some animations, so that's where the fireball spell is popping up, which is what I'm going to be doing for all of these, just kind of having it at the same time off of the same event. But you could create this as its own separate function and then just plug it in. All right, then when I release it, I want to have the trigger parameter change, but from the same audio component. And so I did the execute trigger parameter for fire, which was the name of that one. And then I made the target the same audio component, which when triggered will stop all of the other sounds here, so I don't have to worry about it continuing. I've also got the, off of that, that's where I'm doing the explosion visuals, as well as the impulse happening to the dragon. But again, you could do that in a bajillion different ways. I just made it all one big train. But really, this is where all of it's happening, which is one of the nice things about Metasounds is I really don't need a lot of code. I'm doing it all in the Metasound itself. All of the behavior is happening here. And as long as I have that set up correctly, I can just basically trigger some different parameters and connect different audio components, and I'm good to go. All right, let's check out the Wwise session. So I love Wwise because it is a great way for the sound designer to have a lot of control over what they want to have happen without even needing to code at all or even really needing to open Unreal Engine. As long as you can generate some sound banks and send them to the programmer, you're good to go. All right, so the way that I have this set up is very basic and simple. And so once you kind of understand how the Wwise UI works, everything becomes a lot easier. So basically I have in the actor mixer hierarchy, I just have a folder that I created, which you can right click and just do new child and create the folder. I'm going to put all of my lightning spells sounds in there so that when I collapse it, it's all just within this beautiful little guy. All right, so I have a start, an end, the loop base, and the loop intensity, so 4 pieces, and the start, end, and loop base are all just regular sound effects. So I do new child, sound SFX, name it whatever, and then you see it's red, which means there's no audio yet. So you can import audio by right-clicking and just doing import audio files, or you can drag and drop directly on top of it. All right, so the spell start just has this one audio file, which was that starting sound, which sounds like this. And you can see I have that not set to loop. I don't want it to loop, so it's set to no loop. And then same with the end. The blast, set to not loop. But the loop bass, obviously, set to loop. I want this to loop forever. It sounds like this. And that'll just keep looping until I tell it to not. All right, same with the intensity loop. Which you can hear right now is all just one intensity. And that's because I have not set up any kind of RTPC or anything like that to make it go up in intensity. So let's do that. So under game syncs, yeah, you can see here there's a game parameters spot, which I've already created one, but you can just do new child, game parameter, and I'll say new parameter. All right, so when you create that, you basically have a minimum value and a maximum value and where that value is going to start. So like, for example, this could be a good way to show like health, for example, like 0 health means you're dead, 100 health is full health, and you start at 100 health. And then you can make that so as it gets lower, the little heartbeat plays or whatever. For intensity, I have it set up to just go between 0 and 10, and it starts at 0. All right, so once I have this game parameter set up, I can start to use that. And so the way that I'm going to show the intensity is through a blend container. And so I set it up by going new child, blend container, test blend. Hooray, hooray. All right, and then you can drag and drop. I'm just going to copy and paste since that one already exists. All right, so now you see this is a child of test blend, but nothing's really popping up yet, and that's because I have not created a blend track. And so I'm going to create a blend track. I'm going to name it Super Cool Blend Track. And I'm going to pick what I want to change here. The thing I want to change on this one is going to be the pitch, because I want it to go as it gets more intense. And then here I'm going to pick the game parameter of intensity. All right, so I select intensity, and now you see I've got this scale between 0 and 10, because that's what that is set up to be. If I did like the health thing, for example, it would be 0 to 100, and then I can make it do whatever I want. So I could make it get higher pitched at the end by doing this. If I do this, it's going to go crazy higher pitched, but if I just do it a little bit, all right, and let's test it out. So I'm going to play it. Why did you not work? I realized a common mistake that gets me all the time is when I did this, you heard nothing happened. It didn't change even though I set the parameter, the pitch to go up when it's at that value. And that's because I did not assign this audio to the blend track. So you can have multiple audio files within the blend track, and then you need to manually select that. So in the contents tab down here, you can see in my super cool blend track, there's nothing. And so I want to drag and drop that into it. So now the spell intensity is going to be there. All right, let's test it again. And we have ourselves a value. And so when I feed that into Unreal Engine, I know that I have a value between 0 and 10, and I can drive that in blueprints or code and make it do whatever I want. All right, so now that I have the different elements, I need to actually put those into events that I can use in Unreal. And that's exactly what I did here. I created 2 events. Again, you just right-click, work unit, create an event. There's also a nice little key command for it, but I can never remember all those, so I just right-click and create it. And I created a start and loop, and so this one is going to happen at the very beginning. When you press R, it's going to play this event, which is going to start the spell and start the loop, and keep it going until you release that button. In that case, when you release it, it's going to play the tail event. All right, so I created a play the start, play the intensity loop, play the bass loop, all at the same time, except I made it so that the loops are both going to have a delay of 0.3, just to make it so the start happens and then the loop comes in. I also gave them a very gentle fade in time so that it goes boosh, and then as that's happening, we have a to kind of come in and seamlessly make it sound good. So 3 play events. So you just add here, you can select play, and then I can just go back to my audio. I want it to play this thing. You can drag it and drop it in. It's simple as that. All right, the other event, the tail, is going to be stopping those 2 loops and playing the push sound. And then when that sound ends, that's the end of everything. The loops are going to be stopped. That'll stop, and that'll kill all the sound. All right, I can test that out in Wwise with the Wwise Soundcaster, which is awesome. I love the Soundcaster. I use it all the time. You basically just go into Sessions, and you have this Soundcaster Session one, and you can, again, do New Child Soundcaster Session. I've already done that here, but what you do is I can go to my Events tab, and you can drag and drop events in that you want to be able to test. All right. And then this way, you can just be playing around with everything, checking out how events work within relation to each other, and then also messing around with things like the RTPCs, The real-time parameter controls, like the intensity here. All right, so I'm going to press start on the first loop, on the first event here, and it's going to start the spell and the loop, and that's going to go on forever until I press lightning tail. And while the loop's happening, I can change this in real time, hence the real-time parameter control, to make the intensity go up and down, which was the pitch that we just did. All right, so check it out. Beautiful. All right, let's check out how all of this looks in Unreal. So I connected Unreal and Wwise just through the Wwise launcher. There's a little tab for Unreal, and it picked up the fact that I'd created this project and just let me integrate the two together with just the push of one button. Super easy. All right, and then when I'm in here, now I can actually access all of these things, like events and parameter controls. All right, so I set it up in my level blueprint again. I have my press R event, and when I press R, I'm posting an event, which just means taking that event, making it happen, which is why I had to separate it into events. And then it's reading that from the sound bank. All right, so the event that I started with was the start and loop. You just select that there. And then I connected that into a reset the RTPC value, just in case that value is at something other than 0. Like if I had already done this and got it to 10, for example, that'll reset it back down. And then I'm setting it, and I'm setting the intensity. I want it to happen automatically. It's going to go from 0 to 10, because 0 is the default, 10 is the value I want it to go to. And I'm doing that over the course of 8,000 milliseconds, or 8 seconds. And it's doing that slowly, interpolating between 0 and 10. And so that's going to make it automatically, which should be everything we need. So these 3 nodes are setting up most of the logic of Wwise, which is one of the reasons why it makes it so nice to just design in Wwise, because it's very minimal on the programmery side. You can do all of that work as a sound designer and not have to know any code or blueprints. All right, after that, I have it setting up the visuals, just like I did with the Metasound. All right, then when I release, it's even more simple. It's just a single post event, and I'm posting the lightning tail event. And so when that happens, that's stopping the loops, and it's playing the tail, and that's it. And then also, again, I have that activating the visuals. Super easy. All right, let's check it out in the game. All right, so I've already set up an event here. The nice thing about FMOD is I have it all within one single event, and it looks like this, which looks a little crazy just right off the bat, but we're gonna redesign it here just so you can see what I did. All right, so I'm gonna right-click, new event. This is the version for you. All right, so first thing I need to do, click to add a new sheet. I want a new timeline sheet, and then under the tracks here, I like to just add as many audio tracks as I'm going to need. And so I know I'm going to need one for the start, one for the tail, 2 for the loops. Again, I have a bass loop and an intensity loop. And then I'm also going to have one that is going to have little ice shard sounds that are going to increase in intensity as you get faster and faster. Oops. All right, now I'm going to take my sounds and drag and drop in. So I'm dragging in the start, tail, the intensity loop, the kind of bass crackle loop, and then for all of those little icy sounds, I'm going to use a scatterer instrument, and then I'll drag and drop all those in there. There's 4 different sounds in that one. So now you can see I've got everything. Nothing looks like it's lined up or anything. First thing I'm going to line up is going to be the loop here. So you can see the loop's all different kinds of lengths right now. This loop's actually shorter than this loop, and so that's not going to work amazingly if I want those to loop together in here, unless I press this asynchronous button. All right, so now I can make these both the same length I'm also going to do that with the scatter because that doesn't matter in there. And now you can see I've got a nice equal length loop. All right, so now when I press play, you'll see that it's playing both of these at different times together. So it looks like this. Cool. When it gets to the end, it stops because it's going to just keep going because I haven't set up anything otherwise. This is what that scatter sounds like. All right, so I'm going to set up the loop first. Up in this black area here is the logic track spot, and that's where I can add things like loops, destination markers, so like where one thing's going to go to another thing, different regions, all that good stuff. All right, so when I right-click, I can add a loop region, and I'm just going to check. I want to make sure that these are actually looping too, so in here I'm going to click the little loop, and it's looping infinitely, which is what I want. All right, so now it should loop. Beautiful. All right, now I'm going to select this spot again here. I'm going to create a destination marker, and I'm just going to drag it up. I'm going to name this loop, because what I want to have happen is when I play this, the start, right about here, I want it to jump to that loop. So I'm going to find that spot. I'll do it right on the blast here. That looks good. And I'm going to put add transition to markers loop. So now when it hits this spot, it's going to jump over to the loop, which sounds like this at the moment. And so you can hear that didn't sound good because it just stopped this and went straight into the loop and then cut off the rest of that sound, which is not what I want. And so I can make it so it doesn't do that by double clicking this and going into this nice, beautiful in-between. So I want this one to extend out, and then these ones are going to start. So now I can do this nice, beautiful little kind of crossfade looking thing where I fade out of this guy, fade in on these guys. Double click that again, gather. So now when I hit this spot, this one's going to fade out. These ones are going to fade in on top of each other. So it sounds like this. Beautiful. All right, that is working as intended. All right, now I need to do the same thing for this little tail region here. All right. So I'm going to kind of find that transient here. I'm going to add another destination marker. Let's call this tail. All right, so I want anywhere in the loop to be able to transition to that tail. And so I'm going to select a transition region to the tail. I'm going to give it its own space. I'm actually going to swap it with this. Stretch it out over the course. All right, so now I can make it so that it's going to go to the tail when I tell it to, anywhere in this region. And you can quantize that so that, like, for example, if you wanted to change the next beat, it would be or that's next bar, but one beat right here, quarter notes. You can see a little grid pops up, eighth notes. I can do one measure, 4 measures, any kind of thing like that. Right now this isn't synchronized to any kind of beat, but if I was doing music, for example, that's a great way to set up transitions to happen like the next measure, so it doesn't just kind of cut off in the middle of a phrase. All right, so now this is just going to do it instantly because I selected off. All right, but I need to make a condition upon which it hits that condition and then can go to the tail. So to do that, I'm going to add condition, add parameters. I want it to be a parameter that I can control in Unreal, and so I'm going to do that here. I've already created one, but you do that by just selecting new parameter. I named it tail, and I gave it just 0 to 1, and so 0 is the normal state, and then when it hits 1, it's going to switch to the tail. All right, so I want that to be when the condition is that it's 1, it goes to the tail. So that means I can just drag. You can also see when I put that in here, a new option came up here that I can control the value of in real time. All right, so I made it so that when it hits 1, it's going to go anywhere from in here to the tail. And so again, if I started that, this is not going to work exactly how we want it because I haven't set up the middle ground, but I want to show you what it looks like. All right, so you can see that kind of worked in some ways and didn't in others. So it went to the tail exactly when I told it to, but this loop kept playing until the end and this loop kept playing to the end. And since those are on async, they hit the end in different times and it was chaotic. And that's because I need to set up, again, the little transition region. I'm gonna do that for all 3 of them. You can see here, I set up the tail marker to be right on this transient of the psh. But if I do that, then I can't really have this leading into it super well. So I'm going to put this at the start of it, and then when I double click it, I'm going to drag into it like this until I hit roughly around that spot. And then I'm going to do the opposite for these ones. Make this time even shorter. Beautiful. All right, so now if I start at the beginning, it should play the start, go to the loop there, but still play the end of that while that fades in. Loop this endlessly until I make the tail go to 1, and once it goes to 1, it should pretty instantly transition to this tail marker. Beautiful. All right, now let's set up the thing that makes it so that the pitch can go higher. All right, so if I want the intensity of the loop to get higher in pitch, just like I have done on the other 2, all right, I'm going to create a new parameter sheet, and it's going to use the intensity parameter, which I've already created again. But again, you can just go into new parameter, name it what you want, give it the range that you want it to have. This one's, again, 0 to 10. And so when I click it, it now created a new tab that has the intensity. And so on this sheet, I can add all of the modulation and automation that I want to have happen between 0 and 10. So you can see 0 on one side, 10 on the other side. So this side isn't working the same way, like it's not scrolling side to side. This is actually just the value of 0 to 10. So as I play, you can see the cursor doesn't move, and that's because this isn't happening linear, it's more in the parameter. So linear to the parameter, not time. All right, and the parameter that I want to make happen is this intensity loop. I want the pitch to get higher as I go. So I'm going to find the track I want, click on it, go to pitch, add automation, ka-chunk, and you can see this beautiful line has shown up. All right, so now when I go to intensity, that line is still there. So I want it to be 0 here, that's good. And then at 10, I want to make it get more intense. Let's go like 3.5 semitones. Should be plenty. With pitch, a little goes a long way. If I made that like a bajillion semitones, it's going to go crazy. All right, so now this track is going to be connected to this intensity parameter. And I can mess around with that in real time. Beautiful. There's one more parameter I want to add. I want this scatter instrument to get more epic as it goes along. Right now it sounds like this. But I want it to get more scattery as things get higher up on that intensity chain. And so I'm going to go spawn rate. I'm going to add automation for the spawn rate. So the higher the spawn rate, the more of these. So if I like cranked the spawn rate, for example, you can see it's going crazy. Epic. All right, so I'm going to start this back down at 100. All right, I'm going to go to intensity here. Let's go from like 100 to like 280. Let's see what that sounds like. And so as it gets higher, it's going to start getting more technical terms. All right, so now I can go. Beautiful. All right, so the beautiful thing about this and its beautiful nature and all of its beauty is that now all I need is this one event and these two parameters, and I've got all of the information I need as a programmer. I just need to know to play the event that we created, and I need to know that I can drive the intensity and the tail, and that's it. So let's look at this in Unreal. Finally, we have this ice spell back in Unreal Engine. All right, so I've connected FMOD and the Unreal session, and I've created the same setup here where I'm doing the R press event. And for this one, I had a couple more things I did here. I'm doing play event 2D. I'm not putting it at a location, so it's just kind of happening nicely two-dimensional. And I made the event that ice spell. All right, then I saved the return value of this as a variable so I can check it in different ways. To do that, you just drag off and say, promote to variable. And then you can name that whatever you want. Hooray. And you could put it in a category like audio if you're working with multiple people. I just named it FMOD event so I can keep track of it nicely. All right, so I'm playing that event. And then I wanted to set the parameter of the event, and the parameter name was intensity, which again was the one that is going to slowly go up in pitch and slowly make that scatter instrument get more crazy. FMOD at the time of doing this didn't have a interp2 setting, just like Wwise did, and so I needed to set it up to happen over a certain amount of time, and I used a timeline node for that. And so I just created a new timeline track that goes from 0 to 10 over the course of 6 seconds. So it's instead of 8 seconds, it's doing it over 6 seconds. All right, and then I connected those together. And so now what's happening is it's playing the event, it's setting that so I can make a reference to it, playing the timeline, which is triggering the intensity parameter, and the timeline is taking the value of that and making it go up. I've referenced the same event in event instance here, so I just went to my variable FMOD event, dropped it, get, and then connected it that way. All right, so now when I play it, it's doing the event, which is going to start the start of it and the loop that's going to keep going forever, and it's making the intensity parameter increase to 10 over the course of 5 seconds, not 6 seconds. And then when you release it, I'm doing a little different here from Wwise. I could set the Wwise and Metasound up like this just to make sure that the event itself is happening and that it's kind of where I want it to be. Always a good practice to just make sure that the thing that you're trying to call exists. That way any weird edge cases of errors will not be there. And so I did event instance is valid, and then I plugged in that same event variable, and if it is true that it is valid, then I'm going to do this, which was set global parameter by name, and I wanted the tail parameter to be set to 1. So when I release R, it's checking that this is actually happening, and if it is, it's setting the parameter of tail from 0 to 1, which if you remember, when it gets to 1, triggers the tail, and that'll get us out of there. Just like the other ones, I've made the visuals attached to that as well. Normally, we would have those as probably separate blueprints and all that kind of good stuff. But for demo, this works great. All right, let's see what this looks like. Implementation is one of those things that has a bajillion different ways that you could do it, and really as long as it's working and is optimized for whatever platform you're on, that's great. So this is just how I did it. So basically, in summary, you could take any of these spells and then you could